In this video, we are going to take a trig ratio in a particular quadrant, and we are going to find other trig ratios and even some trig identities. So if secant of theta equals negative 13 over 5, and theta is between pi and 3 pi over 2, find the exact values in reduced form for tangent of theta, sine of 2 theta, and cosine of theta over 2. When you are given a question like this, the first thing that you should do is you should draw a triangle. And remember, when you're drawing your triangle, you're always making a reference triangle with the x-axis. So this piece right here is telling you what quadrant your triangle is going to be in. Now, if you think back to when you learned the unit circle or when you learned about radians, this was always 0 radians. This was always pi over 2. Unless you're rotating the other way, but this is positive pi over 2, this is positive pi, this is positive 3 pi over 2, and this, as you go around, is 2 pi, and then you could keep going around adding another pi over 2 each section. But this quarter rotation is pi over 2. Now we are told that our triangle is going to live between pi and 3 pi over 2. So our triangle is going to be in this section here. And when you draw the triangle doesn't have to be super accurate. You just need to make sure it's in the right quadrant. So we are going to have a triangle come in this quadrant right here. And every single triangle that you make is going to go up with the x-axis. Now, this one looks like a 45-degree triangle. Obviously, that is not accurate right now, but you just needed to know what quadrant it's going to be in. So there's our right triangle. And there's our theta. Now we need to use this information right here to figure out what are some of these side lengths here. So what is secant of theta? Well, secant of theta is the reciprocal of cosine of theta. And cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. The reciprocal of adjacent over hypotenuse is when you flip them. The reciprocal is going to be our hypotenuse. So 13 is our hypotenuse. And adjacent is going to be 5. This is the adjacent side to theta because theta is always pointing to the opposite. Now, where does that negative come into play? Well, the quadrant that you're in is where those negatives come into play. So this is going to be negative. And then your y is going to be negative. Your opposite is going to be negative because of the quadrant that it's in. The hypotenuse is never negative because the hypotenuse comes from Pythagorean Theorem, which we're going to use now. So we need to figure out, before we can do what is tangent, because tangent we need the opposite, we need to figure out this opposite leg. To get the opposite leg, we use Pythagorean Theorem. We have negative 5 squared, and put that in parentheses, plus, I don't know, I'm going to call it y squared, equals 13 squared. Well, negative 5 squared is 25. 13 squared is 169. I'm trying to get y alone, so I'm going to subtract 25 from over here. And 169 minus 25 is 144. Take the square root, and we get that this opposite leg is 12. Now remember, because it's in this quadrant, it's going to be negative 12. Now we have all of our side lengths. We have our opposite. We have our adjacent. We have our hypotenuse. We can start answering these questions. Tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. Our opposite is right here, and if it helps you out, you could write out opposite, adjacent. So our tangent is going to be negative 12 over negative 5, and a negative over a negative is a positive. Our tangent is negative 12 over 5. And you could find all of these. So let's say the question didn't ask for tangent. Let's say the question asked for sine, and I'll write that down here. Sine of theta is opposite over hypotenuse. My opposite is negative 12. My hypotenuse is 13. So there would be my sine. Cosine of theta is adjacent, which is negative 5, over hypotenuse. And we could keep going. We could do the cotangent and the cosecant if we wanted to. Okay, so there we go. You got to draw your triangle, draw it in the correct quadrant, It always makes a reference angle up with that x-axis. Now we're going to move on to an identity problem. So B says, what is sine of 2 theta? Okay, well that's a little bit different, but if you look down here in the left-hand corner, I've got some formulas here. And the very first one on here is sine of 2 theta. Well, sine of 2 theta is the same thing as 2 times sine of theta times cosine of theta. This is going to be the same thing as 2 times sine of theta times cosine of theta. But we know what sine of theta is. It's right here. So we're going to replace that sine with the actual value, which is negative 12 over 13. And we're going to replace cosine with that actual value, which is negative 5 over 13. And then we multiply straight across. So we can multiply straight across. 2 times negative 12 is negative 24. Negative 24 times negative 5 is positive 120. So we multiply the numerators. Then we'll multiply the denominators. 13 times 13 is 169. There's your value of the double angle of sine. Essentially what that's saying is if we took this angle that we have and we doubled it, what would our value be? Now, if you're not super great at fractions, I'm not going to judge you. Take your handy dandy calculator. And on your calculator, type this in as you see it. 2 times negative 12 over 13 times negative 5 over 13. Hit enter. It's not going to give you an exact answer though. And it says that this needs to be in exact values. Our favorite subject in the entire world is math, so I'm going to click math. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit enter one more time and I get 120 over 169. So even if you're not great at multiplying straight across in your head, use your calculator, use your resources. All right, now we're going to move on to this half angle, which the half angle formula is not on here, but we can make it. So right here we've got cosine squared of theta, and we've got 1 plus cosine of 2 theta over 2. If you wanted to get, no, I don't like that. We got to find the half angle for cosine. I don't know why it's not on there. So the half angle formula, you are going to want to have that on your cheat sheet. And here they are. So our cosine half angle is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine over 2. So we're going to have plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine of theta over 2. You're going to want to have that on your cheat sheet so that you can use that. Okay. The trickiest part about this is figuring out if it's going to be plus or minus. We are trying to find a half angle. The angle right here lives in the third quadrant. Our angle has to be between 180 and 270, or pi and 3 pi over 2. If we were to cut that in half, if we were to cut this range in half, then the very smallest angle that it could be, pi divided by 2, would be right here. The very smallest angle that this 270 could be, so 270 divided by 2, I should be able to do that in my head, is 135. So our new angle has to live in here. You have to do some analyzing. So the full angle's here. The half angle is going to live here somewhere because we're taking our angle and literally cutting it in half. If our new angle lives in here, is the cosine positive or negative? Well, remember, your cosine is always your x values. Right here we have plus plus. Cosine's positive. Right here we have negative plus. Cosine is negative. So our cosine is going to be negative for this one. Now everything else is the same. So I'm going to do negative square root of 1 plus, well, my cosine is actually negative 5 over 13 all over 2. Maybe you're not great at simplifying that. Maybe you're not great with fractions. That's okay. Take your calculator. Do not put the square root symbol in here. Square roots are irrational. So if you put the square root in here, your calculator is not going to give you an exact answer. And again, it says exact answers only. So I'm going to put 1 plus negative 5 over 13 divided by 2. And I'm going to change that into a fraction. I get 4 over 13. So this turns into negative root 4 over 13. And now we have to do some simplifying. Well, remember that square root goes to both the top and the bottom. So really this turns into the square root of 4 is 2. I can't do the square root of 13. But I'm also not allowed to have a square root in my denominator. So I would have to rationalize my denominator, which we've done quite a few times now. And we rationalize our denominator by multiplying by the square root of 13 over the square root of 13, because this is just 1. So I'm allowed to multiply by that because it's just 1. What I end up with in the numerator is negative 2 root 13. The square root of 13 times the square root of 13 is 13. This is the value for the half angle of cosine. All right, recap. Draw your triangle out in the appropriate quadrant. Then maybe label opposite, adjacent, hypotenuse. Tangent for this one is opposite over adjacent. It's always opposite over adjacent, but this one asks for tangent. If you're asked for sine, it's opposite over hypotenuse. If you're asked for cosine, it's adjacent over hypotenuse. Use your formulas for the double angle and the half angle.